There we go. Good morning, YouTube folks. Need to get this out on the social media feeds, and then we'll spark up the podcast. Let me see, Twitter, X, whatever you is, and blue sky, and Scott will be back. Wait to hit record on here. Waiting for Scott to get his fire restarted. But we are live on the YouTube. Say hi to the YouTube people, Scott.
Hey, YouTube people, how are you?
YouTubers.
Tubers.
All
Going
right.
tubing.
Let's get the podcast started here. That's why we're all gathered. All right. Go right on this computer. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. Thursday, January the 9th, 9:23 a.m. I know we say we're going to get these things started at 9, but then Scott and I get on at 9 and get to talking, and here we are at 9:25. But we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to hit football, men's and women's basketball, some topics within those topics as well. With the NIL transfer portal, just kind of an overview of that. And then obviously a lot of talk this week about men's basketball and attendance and apathy and all that stuff that we haven't talked about before on this podcast.
No, never.
None of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
House settlements, things like that. We haven't discussed that for the last 4 years,
Yeah.
with the government being involved in the Supreme Court and all that. But yeah, we'll get into that. But I think we should probably start with the biggest news of the week, and that was the addition of South Dakota State transfer quarterback Mark Gronowski. You remember Kreskin
Yeah, I do.
from
Vaguely.
Letterman?
Yes.
For
That was
those
way
that
back then.
don't remember, it's like it was somebody that could basically read your mind, kind of like who was the Carson? Who was the character? Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody in the YouTube get me that. Karnak.
Karnak, there it is.
He's
Yeah.
Karnak Kreskin. This is Scott for this podcast. He had Gronowski's name before the kid, weeks before the kid even went in the transfer portal as a guy that Iowa might be able to get. Lo and behold, this week he commits. Scott, congratulations on that. Digging that guy out and letting the Iowa coaches know that he's the guy they should get.
Well,
Or did you not do that?
I didn't let them know unless they were listening to the podcast, but tweeted it a few times before that. But no, I guess it remains to be, now that it's happened. Now I'm worried that, oh my gosh, I hope he performs, because then otherwise it makes me look really bad. But no, I do think. We look at this move, and I know I talked about this before, that if he enters it, don't take no for an answer. There are no excuses. You can't. I don't want to, and I kind of went on a rant about this. I don't want to hear you can't do it, or they were finished number 2, or, well, we gave it our best and we tried really hard and ultimately picked somebody. No, you needed to go in guns blazing and get your guy, and they did. And so, for all, there's been a lot of freak outs and stuff like that. People should be thrilled about this, because you're getting the best quarterback Iowa's had since at least C.J. Beathard, and if not better than Beathard. He's got a better resume than Beathard did. Now, he did it at a lower level, but South Dakota State is not a lower level school. Let's put it in the Mountain West or another mid-major, and it's winning that league too. 49 career wins, out of 55 games. He needs 2 wins to set the Division I record for most wins by a quarterback, which would happen to coincide with Kirk's record. That's kind of a freaky.
And it'd be at Iowa State.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a coincidence there, I would say, but he's got amazing numbers throughout his career. He was the Walter Payton Award winner in 2023, as the FCS Player of the Year, 2-time national champion. This year they got to the semifinals and lost to a kid from Solon, who's their biggest rival. And you cannot understate the North Dakota State, South Dakota State rivalry. It's intense as you can only imagine. So this is a big time move. This isn't just a guy. This isn't Hank Brown or Brendan Sullivan coming over, or even Cade to some extent. I mean, this is a guy who he will lead the program. He is the best quarterback on the team. He is going to be the leader. He's going to do everything you ask him to do. Now, will he perform against Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Iowa State, Wisconsin? That remains to be seen. But for what you want and for what you're selling, this is exactly what you want. It's as good as any move quarterback wise in the portal as there was. That includes Miller Moss to Louisville, anybody, because he can do everything you ask him to do.
But he can't do it himself, right?
No.
And that's the thing. You see Miller Moss going to Jeff Brom, you're like, holy crap, this kid's coming to an offense that's just passing offense was what, 130? It's 131 out of 130, right. Just terrible. And what would this offense have been without Caleb Johnson this year in the running game? Because their quarterback play again was abysmal and bad. And I guess abysmal is worse than bad, but but it's been that way when we've talked about it for this decade. But you have to get the guy in there to be able to make that progress. And they have the guy now. And you talked about both, right? The positives and the negatives here. We saw him in Kinnick Stadium not perform well against a really good Iowa defense. And he plays against some really good FCS programs, but he also plays against some really not so good teams at that level. And he's going to get the competition is a severe upgrade week by week by week. The road games are different. Being at Iowa State, as much as it's hard to play in the Fargo Dome, it's not the same as going to Iowa State.
Yeah.
So like Scott says, you did what you could do here. Now you have to figure out how to make this work. How do you put this kid in position and put your offense into position to complement the other two phases, which it has failed to do now for too long?
This is where it is a leap of faith, and you've got to believe. And I understand that there's a natural cynicism among the fan base, and it's been growing over time, and rightly so, to say, I won't believe it until I see it. And I understand that.
That's fair.
Yeah. And I understand it. And period, hit return, next paragraph. The thing is, with now Gronowski, we'll look at it from the, I would say not the sunshine and rainbow side. You're right. FCS team playing against other FCS teams and playing, the Dakota schools, all four of them are great programs. The Montana schools are great programs. He has played against some elite, Iowa's defense was elite. Now, he didn't have a great game, but neither did anybody else. And when you're playing it, it's not his fault necessarily that Iowa had Jack Campbell, Iowa had other defenders who were that elite. And of course, the punter was as good as any player on the field that day. He single-handedly, he indirectly, but it was his responsibility to give them two safeties. But what do we see of Mark Gronowski as an individual, and how can that apply to Iowa? And I think you look at 6'3", 225, physical tools, can make every throw, is accurate. This year he was down a little bit, but the team around him was down a little bit too. It wasn't just him. His numbers were still really good, but overall his, he just wasn't quite the same player that he was maybe, a year ago when they did win a national title. But he's accurate. He can make long throws. He can play from the pocket. He can also run. Now it could be more of a structured run. You could also have him roll out. You can have him do anything you want from this offense. So he's not like Brendan Sullivan. He's not a pure runner. He's not that good, but he's way better than Iowa's had. And that for a long time, that includes Beathard. I mean, he's a better runner than Beathard and stuff. So you could do what you want with him. Now you look around him. at the talent that's surrounding Iowa. You have one of, if not the best returning center in the country in Logan Jones. You have a tackle in Jennings Dunker, who's I think he's the sixth highest rated offensive lineman last year, and he's returning. You've got other players returning up front. You're not going to have Caleb Johnson. That's a killer. But I think they've got players behind him that are pretty good too.
Mhm.
Kamari Moulton and Jazz Patterson, I think that's a healthy situation. It appears that they are going to get another receiver today, and Sam Phillips. I liked the trajectory of that core this year. I thought they made strides. I had not seen that in a long time from that group, to where I have hope that, okay, this is, they're building something with Reese Vanderzee and Jarrett Bowie and Dayton Howard, and Jacob Gill is a really good, player, and Seth Anderson, if he's healthy, is there. I think now you're starting to see the guts of, all right, maybe they've got something there. It's there's competition, so it's not like, well, just hope he goes out there and does something. It's there's some legitimacy there, and then overall, I think you plug him in and he helps everybody around him get better. So pie in the sky a little bit, but I do think that this is the step Iowa needed to legitimize its offense and kind of empower Tim Lester to do what he wants to do offensively, and make a serious impact.
You talked about Brendan Sullivan, and I think if people um, watch what Brendan Sullivan did, I think that's kind of what you can see in Mark Gronowski to a certain extent. Some of the running ability, some of the ability to roll out and call plays where the pocket moves a little bit, keeping plays alive off schedule, things like that. But as Scott said, Gronowski, at least to this point, has shown accuracy, touch on the deep ball, some elements that maybe Brendan didn't bring to the table. Does Sullivan stay?
I'm only speculating here. It's I think it would be difficult if he wants to be a starting quarterback in college football with one more year left to stay at Iowa. I mean let's just speak to the reality of
I mean, it seems pretty black and white, right?
Yeah.
These guys both have 1 year of eligibility. Only one of them can play.
Right.
Unless you want to move Sullivan as receiver, he could probably be good at that or some type of.
Well, hell,
But the point is
there.
Like with
That's a good idea.
With Cade and Sullivan, you had different guys. You could play. You could put packages in. These guys seem too similar for that.
Yeah, and see, if I would have tried to keep Brendan, if you were going to go with him and Hank Brown, for instance,
right? And Hank Brown would be different than Gronowski.
Yeah, for sure. And now you look at it, and you've got two guys. And Mark Gronowski is number one. You're not bringing him in. You're bringing him in to compete, but come on, he's not competing. He's competing with himself unless he gets hurt, and that's the only thing why you would want Brendan Sullivan, because you're not going to bring him in for any situations. No. And in fact, if you get a blowout like in the first game against Albany, you'd want Hank Brown or Jimmy Sullivan or somebody else in there instead of a senior. You just don't. You need something else. So that said, wow, you Brendan Sullivan bringing up and going to moving to wide receiver, if that is a possibility. If he wants to even get a remote opportunity to go play in the NFL, then that's the way to go. All right, you put that out there. Now I'm all mixed up. But
I think about weird stuff when I get up early in the morning, and I'm like, well, thinking about the podcast. I'm like, all right, just putting myself in his situation, and trying to be objective about it. What are his options? He can stay and be a backup quarterback, and you don't root. He's in the room. He's not rooting for Mark Gronowski to get hurt so he can play. It would hurt him, because they're going to build a relationship over time here. So does he just wait and maybe take a chance that he gets to play? Does he go somewhere else now and maybe get a chance to start? Maybe it's not, Power 5 level, but I'm sure there's schools, mid-major schools that would take a shot at him. Or does he switch positions or try to do some because you can do some different things even as he's at receiver where he throws the ball. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of cool stuff you could do if he would be willing to do that, but it'd be interesting because with or without him is a lot different because
Yeah.
with him as a backup, you're feeling a heck of a lot better than without him.
Yeah. And this is the tough thing. This is why college football is a business now.
Yep.
And you cannot look past that element. And whether and this is where if victory might have been the enemy of progress, that if they beaten Missouri, if he on that last drive they would have scored and maybe they won in overtime or something like that, then I don't know about the staff necessarily, but certainly the fans may have said, "Oh, he's our guy. We like him." There's limitations there, and when you're Iowa and you're in the league that you're in, you could either be stagnant and say, well, we like who we have and we'll move forward with it. Or you could say, you know what, we need to get better and become a championship caliber team. And there are certain aspects that you do need to have faith in and say, we think he can be better and project that, linebacker, for instance, this year,
Mhm.
don't go in the portal. You've got a lot of really good young players. You've got some players who've been their backups for a few years. Let's see what they have. The quarterback wasn't one of them this year. Maybe it is next year. Maybe it's like you saw a lot of out of Hank Brown or Jimmy Sullivan this year to think, you know what, in 2026, we're going to ride it with those guys. It might be a struggle, but we think we can be pretty good there. That's good, but that's not the situation they're in now. And then you look at it for Brendan, again, zero sum. It's one position, one player. And you picked a player who's one of the handful of the best quarterbacks out there. I think John Mateer from Washington State going to Oklahoma is probably the best, but Miller Moss maybe number two, but I would put Gronowski right in that same category as highly sought after, and ended up, and his delay in getting into the portal, helped Iowa more than anything, because if he would have left like day one, that might have been a little bit of a struggle. But I
You
think
like
with
him better than Pribula?
he's more equipped to start right away and play well. I mean, I think
That's
Pribula
fair.
maybe has a little bit more upside, but he hasn't started a game, and so and that doesn't say who knows, he could
I
be
think at worst they're equivalent.
yeah, yeah, exactly, for this year.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years down the road that Pribula's better. I don't know. So if you're Brennan, they made their case. They're going with somebody else over you as the starting quarterback. You have 1 year left. You have that decision. Now, in his case, thankfully, as a human being, he's got a degree from a great university at Northwestern. You've got 1 more year of football as a quarterback because you're not going to play at the next level. Do you want to just, hey, I want to go play football. I want to go somewhere else and a MAC school or something like that? Or, you know what? With my wheels and my ability, I think if I threw myself into being a wide receiver, I might have a shot there. And I like being here in Iowa City. I like the way people rallied around me. And as you said, Rob, I mean, you could play around, and Lester would probably like ding light bulb, like, hey, we can have end arounds, passes. We could have motion, stop, catch. Throw it at Gronowski on the wing. You can do all kinds of stuff, tinkering. And Ferentz, of course, is going, I can't see. I'm wearing
Yeah.
blinders.
Let me know when it's over.
Let me know when he scores or we punt. but but anyway, huh? Wow,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
food for
you think
thought.
about, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that it's the most athletic quarterback room Iowa's had under
Yeah.
Kirk Ferentz. I mean, just
Oh
from
yeah.
an athletic standpoint with Gronowski and Sullivan.
Yeah.
So what
And
could
Hank
you
Brown
do with
too.
an athlete? Jimmy Sullivan's a good athlete.
Yeah. Right. They got
So
athletes. Oh my gosh. Who knew you didn't have to have statues back there?
yeah, we'll have a lot more time to talk about this quarterback situation. It's a positive. It just is. It's even for the people that are taking a wait and see approach, which I think I would put myself in that bucket because I've just I'm going to be positive about Gronowski and I want to accentuate what he did at South Dakota State and believe that that transfers and translates over to this level. But I think you have to have at least a little bit of pause there with that. But we sat here and we talked, was it last week or the week before? How do you feel about the quarterback situation, Scott? Not good.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the quarterback situation now, Scott?
Good.
That's the difference. And now,
Yeah.
so you're going into the season with good,
Yeah.
and this could really be good. Whereas the ceiling prior to the addition of Gronowski was kind of capped. Now you can think about, wow, if this thing really clicks, this could be, because we've talked about it, and you mentioned it with the linebackers. The defense is going to be good with Phil Parker and Seth Wallace, but I think it would be naive to think it wouldn't even take a step back a little bit next year with the losses it's had without additions. Now, if they get a lockdown on the outside, or, a super edge or something like that, that obviously changes the complexion. But right now, you look at it, they're going to need more offense with the schedule they face next year.
That's why this move was even more paramount than ever before.
Yeah.
And if they were still playing in a 14-team conference in the West Division, and Illinois was probably the favorite, and Nebraska was getting better, and blah blah blah, you could stand pat a little bit and think that, yeah, we could still compete with these players. That's not the case anymore, because other than your rivals, your three rivals you play every year, everything changes. And when you've got Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon all coming to Kinnick Stadium, and you're going on the road to Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Iowa State, who won 11 games and was the Big 12 runner-up, and
They're
beat
losing
Miami.
their coach, though.
They could be. I wrote about that yesterday. I got to follow that thing. No,
the Bears fans did not seem like to think that was a good idea.
I think it's a bad idea for Matt. That is as dysfunctional of a place. I mean, our heritage on NFL teams have really dysfunctional ownership groups. So I could see a lot of other places where if he wanted to take that jump, he could be more successful.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, you've got the point that, and then you also got to go like USC, and you've got some, and then
Nebraska.
You go to Nebraska, you go to Wisconsin, you play Minnesota at home. They won 8 games. They're pretty good this year. So if you don't have enough offense, you're not going to be able to win those games 13-10. Maybe one of them 13-10. Maybe Nebraska again at Nebraska, like that seems to always be, or Minnesota at home. You're going to have to score. You're going to be in some situations where you're going to need to flex a little bit. I mean, Penn State could be in the championship game, and Oregon was number 1 all year long, and they feel good about Dante Moore as replacing Dylan Gabriel, but still, you've got to be able to punch. You can't just defend and outlast. So
that's if they don't get Quinn Ewers.
Right. They might. You never know. You never know. That's the way.
That's the thing. I mean, we don't. This isn't what Iowa's team's going to be.
Yeah.
On January 9th, the roster's not finalized.
No. And I've tried to keep up with all of the comings and goings. I have Iowa's roster. I keep a chart on it as always, and even the walk-ons now, since there's a cap on it, and they're about right up close to the cap now. I mean, they've let go of a lot of walk-ons and
really good ones too, guys that I wrote about that I thought had pretty good potential to develop here, and that's the casualty of this whole thing.
Yeah, and good for them that a lot of them have gotten scholarship offers. Even, like Johnny Pescuzzi, goes to West Virginia. That's great. You're happy for him. Trip Woody, the backup kicker, goes to Syracuse. But, you look and it's like they don't have a backup kicker right now. You're going to need one.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And so it's rough. But here's some numbers, Rob. I've dug a lot into this. And first of all, 93 touchdowns for Gronowski in his career, 20 interceptions. He's made 60, according to PFF, 60 big-time throws. I don't know how many Iowa's had in recent memory, but it's probably been in the neighborhood of between 4 or 5 over that same period. Um, I looked at some other things regarding Iowa's numbers passing wise versus that of its most recent predecessors, and over the last 5 years, Iowa's had 41 passes of 15 plus yards. That's 8 per year. Nate Stanley in 3 years had 61. No, that was the average. I'm sorry, 41 per year. Nate had 61 total. But the red zone, which is, I think they made a lot of improvement this year, passing, and certainly over the Bryan era. Nate Stanley had 45 red zone touchdown passes and 1 interception. CJ Beathard had 18 in a 2-year starting period. Touchdowns, 1 interception. Over the last 5 years combined, 29 and 5. So that's the area where Gronowski's going to need to help this offense grow. And I think play calling was the major reason why it was better this year, and a major reason why it wasn't any good for a 4 or 5 year period there for after Nate Stanley, 3 or 4 years. And I mean, how many times didn't they throw the ball over the goal line?
Yeah.
And that was schematic as much as was anything. So that's an area to me where they need to make, yards per attempt. Here's a couple of numbers. Gronowski in 23 is really good season. Yards per attempt, 9.96. In 23 here with Deacon Hill, yards per attempt, 4.8. One of the worst in the last
That's
10
incredible.
years. I mean, less than half. Yards per completion, he was 14.6 that year. That's pretty damn good. 9.8 for Iowa. I mean, it's just that's where I think you get the passing numbers up. And if I hate to play the hypothetical game for a lot of these things, but if Iowa had better quarterback play that didn't go 5 of 18 over the last 3 quarters against Iowa State, you think they might win. One more completion, maybe they win. The first half against Michigan State was as abysmal as anything we saw a year ago. And they were down 15-0. The defense did as much as it could in the first half. It gave up field goals. It didn't give up touchdowns. The offense didn't do anything to keep themselves on the field. They lose. The defense allowed Michigan State to run at will. Still, better quarterback play keeps the defense away. Maybe you have a chance.
Your offense is so bad, you're needing your defense to be near perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's unsustainable.
Exactly. Last year, that was a miracle in 23 to get to a championship game and win 10 games. This year, I mean, they only won 1 game, I think it was, by a touchdown, or less. The rest of them were blowouts that Iowa had won. And so you look at, the UCLA game. Brendan Sullivan made a lot of mistakes. The Mizzou game was a coin flip. And Iowa quarterback made some fatal mistakes. It was there were some plays he made that were great. But then, like, you think about the Addison Ostrenga pass on 3rd and 3 and 3rd and 2 in the first half, wide open guy overthrew. And then Kirk decided to punt or take a field or a penalty and punt. And then the interception, that's a throwaway. And I understand that he might be too wound up, and you just can't have that. I mean, and Ohio State wouldn't have mattered if they had Mark Gronowski or Tom Brady. They might not have won that game. So, but then again, Cade McNamara had 3 turnovers in the 3rd quarter, and they were down 7-0. It's probably more in the neighborhood of 21-7 you lose, as opposed to 35-7. That's big time. I mean, because you compound that all, Rob, and this isn't pie in the sky. This is kind of reality to me, that instead of 8 and 5, if you take those games that they, with a good quarterback, a Mark Gronowski in there, and they beat Iowa State, they beat UCLA, they beat Michigan State, they play a much better game against Ohio State, still lose by like 2 touchdowns, and they're 11-1. then you got a puncher's chance of getting in the playoff. But that, and going back to the beginning of the year when I even said that it was kind of playoff or bust, a lot of that's predicated on decent quarterback play that Iowa never got. Now, the problem for Iowa is next year's schedule is so much more difficult than this year's. And they could be 8-4 and be a much better 8-4 team and not get anywhere because they lose a couple of close games to some really good teams. But you're never going to know. If you have average quarterback play next year, then you're fighting to get into a bowl game. So this was the move they had to make. They've finally got a quarterback room that's in the right direction, because if he went out and got Hank Brown right away. He knew him, he liked him. And if he can learn from Mark Gronowski and put himself in a position that next year he's a starter and he's a good one and he's learned everything. Iowa hasn't been in that position since CJ Beathard handed the baton over to Nate Stanley.
Yeah.
That's really healthy. So they're in a good spot now. And we've got a long off season to talk about, whether they're going to win 10 games, go to the playoff, go to the Outback Bowl for the first time since 2018 or whatever. But I think that they're in a much better spot now than they were a week ago this time.
And those predictions would be incomplete if we did them now, because again, the roster is going to change between now and the first game of the season. As Scott mentioned earlier, looks like Sam Phillips, wide receiver from Tennessee Chattanooga, will be a Hawkeye. Pete Nakos from On3 posted that the other day, that he felt good about Iowa's chances there. Not sure what happened with him I think he visited USC last week. Then he reported an offer from Pitt. So I think, and it's smart for these guys to get in the portal and just check out all your options, man. See what's best. So now if he lands on Iowa, that gives me even more confidence that he feels confident about where he's going, if that's the case. They also added Bryce Hawthorne from much less heralded transfer from South Dakota State, but also an interesting prospect, defensive lineman out of Minnesota, who's developed nicely there, added weight, really kind of built himself up. So this is one of those cases where he comes into Iowa and hopefully you get a few years out of him. Disappointed they lost on Sasha Garcia, the William and Mary cornerback, who was scheduled to visit here this weekend. I don't understand why defensive backs in the transfer portal aren't more open to Iowa. It's kind of strange. But I think we would agree, Scott, that that's a position that you want to add to. And I think your conversation earlier I think you look at every position in the portal and say, how do we project the guys, linebacker, for instance?
Yeah.
Do we think we can get somebody that's definitely better than what we project Jaden Harrell to be, or whoever? No, it's not. It's a nominal difference at best. Stick with what you have. There's no need to invest in it. I think it will be easier for them to look at cornerback and say, is this guy an upgrade over what we have, or at least what we have to date? And that's not to say that John Nestor and TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee won't make the jumps that Ojemudia and Bradley Fletcher, and go down the list of guys that can. But this is part of the evaluation and roster management. I think they could use another cornerback. I wouldn't be disappointed if they added another edge. But they did address the defensive line in a way with Jonah Pace and Bryce Hawthorne. Maybe add another there, maybe cornerback. What else are you thinking portal-wise moving forward here?
Yeah, I mean, once Phillips says yes to Iowa, I think then if you can get a tackle, get it. But, and it's too bad they didn't get the Rice tackle. That would have been perfect. But, you lose to Ohio State in most of your recruiting battles. That's just the way the world works. If you can get one more, but there again, that's the same type of thing where Iowa was in on, or at least had kicked the tires on a Missouri Valley offensive tackle
Hmm.
from Illinois State. Um, they thought about it. They thought he was a nice player. One person told me it's kind of like Nick DeYoung in some ways. Felt like, yeah, pretty good player. Then Texas Tech out of nowhere comes by and apparently pays him about 800K. And they're like, no, we're not even gonna entertain that. And okay, but then you start to look and you evaluate, if we really invest in Trevor Loud every single day and make him believe that he can be the left tackle of the future for the Iowa Hawkeyes and he is going to be the best player there versus some kid at a lower level, that's played a lot, but what does he bring? Is he better? And you've got to add that up. And the one thing that Iowa does better than almost any other school, if not every school, is chemistry is very, very important at Iowa, and they do a great job with it. That there is a balance there, that they understand that you got to, keep people happy, because if you were to go out and get somebody to replace somebody on your line, then everybody around them has to feel good that, okay, this is an upgrade. It's not just we're getting somebody and he's going to play because we got him, sign him as a free agent.
Have to
And
fit too, right? There
yeah,
wasn't not to pick on Caden Proctor, it wasn't working.
yeah, there wasn't a good fit. There wasn't a good vibe. He left. Probably everybody better off for it
Yeah,
in the long run anyway. Same thing with defense. They've got to make that evaluation that can Kenny Merriweather. I mean, look at defensive end, for instance.
hmm,
You're bringing back Ethan Herkett. That's the equivalent of going and getting a multi-year starter out of the portal. Max Llewellyn, he's a guy who deserves his chance to start. I think he's really good. Brian Allen, once he's healthy, is going to be a key rotational player there. Then they've got to look and say, do we have a number 4? Do we have Kenny Merriweather make that step up to get 15 snaps a game? Or will Joseph Anderson or somebody else, a younger player, Yosei Epineza, can he rotate day one
he's
like his
turning some
brother?
heads this week.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm almost looking at edge going,
Yeah,
that's an organic place that they
yeah.
could probably rest at. Defensive tackle was not one where they could do that. And so defensive tackle, they get Jonah Pace, who had 11 TFLs for Central Michigan, 34 tackles. And then Bryce, and he's a starter. He walks in, and he and Jeremiah Pittman are going to battle. And one will start and one will rotate a lot next to Aaron Graves. Okay. But what Iowa's done the best at is when they've had 4 or 5 people, and that's where Bryce Hawthorne, you played a lot last year. You had 5.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Can you walk in and rotate at that position? And then the next year, can you start?
Hmm.
And then but you also throw him in the pot with everybody else. And, because who knows, Devin Kennedy might make that huge jump in this building season that they're going through right now. And so then you're really healthy. I think you look at linebacker. That's one where you say, you know what? Seth Wallace is trained 3 first-team All-Americans, unanimous first-team All-Americans since 2017 there. Jaden Harrell has waited his turn. He's a great teammate. Carson Shire was as athletic as any linebacker they had on the team the last few years, since Jack Campbell anyway. Just been injured. Jackson Rexroth has waited his turn. He's played a lot. He's been a lot on special teams. Plus the 3 redshirt freshmen and 2 incoming true freshmen are off the effing charts as far as being great athletes and stuff. Let's just let that one grow organically. We might take a few lumps in a few games, but we think we got a chance because, look at the faith that Jay Higgins got us, but then you turn your eyes to the secondary and there's a lot of turnover. I would argue that some of the players that came back didn't perform as well as they should have, or didn't meet expectations. Let's put it that way. Maybe their expectations were too high, but I thought Sebastian Castro was good. But I thought he'd be first team All-American good. Wasn't quite there. Like Quinn Schulte was good, but I didn't think he was a dominant performer per se out there. I look at Xavier Wampa, still has a great starter kit. inconsistent.
Mhm.
Will he be better? I'm asking you this too. Would he be better, you think, having the opportunity to finally be the guy and not have veterans around him where he kind of gets moved around? But sometimes players get better by just being able to be the guy, to get the, because otherwise you're kind of relying on other leadership. And if you can be the alpha, then sometimes it allows you to grow personally, take pride in what you do, and gain that responsibility. I don't know. Do you think that that's a possibility, or I'm just fishing here?
With Xavier?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's steadily improved, and you just hope it all clicks in next year now that he's got. But I think that's in conjunction with what you're saying, right? He's given more responsibility, and then hopefully he takes the next step in his development together. Those work together, and then he plays his best football, as Kirk likes to say, when he's the guy, what you're talking about. I almost wonder if he might be better at cash too. I've thought about that, just where because he loves to hit. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And maybe moving him even farther down in the box would be better, but I don't know because I don't know construction wise, what does that do for Cone Entringer? Where does that put Jack Lutmer? I mean, I guess those guys, Phil can look in the spring and say, move the pieces around and see what works best. Because I think after this season, he's not happy with how his secondary performed, and I'm sure he's looking at everything.
Exactly. I think based on what I've seen on how they play and how they want to play those positions, I think Xavier probably moves to free, and
Okay.
and instead of staying at strong, naturally you think strong safety hitter type of thing,
Yeah.
but in Iowa they play a two deep, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit different. Um, it's more of a weak side player as opposed to an actual three deep free. Cohen Entringer, once he's back healthy, will be more of the strong. And then Zach Lutmer, because of his, the one thing out of that, you've got to cover the slot. And it's got to be short range quickness and overall speed. And I think Lutmer's the fastest of the three. Maybe
Okay.
Entringer's there, but he's definitely a better cover guy. He's kind of not Cooper because nobody's Cooper, but he's kind of in that ballpark. So I think that's probably how they're going to play it, and they'll probably be pretty good at it. And then you look at corner. This is where why you paid your guy $1.9 million to get corner right. And I think everybody should still trust Phil's evaluation 1,000% on this. Does he believe that he can get TJ Hall, the Jalen Watson, John Nestor, Deshaun Lee? Can they go from taking their lumps all year long to being not only good, but very good, NFL caliber good, as all those other cornerbacks have done in the past? Can he get them there? Can he get them to be a Matt Hankins or a
Josh Jackson.
Josh Jackson? Oh my gosh. Michael Ojemudia,
Bradley Fletcher.
Bradley Fletcher going way back.
Yep.
Amari Spivey,
Yeah.
there's some amazing defensive backs. Can he get them to be a guy who got beat up? I mean, look at 2018. Riley Moss and Juju Brents have to start as true freshmen.
Yeah.
And they had a really good game against great receivers in Minnesota, and they got torched by Purdue, just annihilated. Well, Riley Moss is a starting cornerback and a very, very good starting cornerback in the NFL, and historic because of his skin color.
Yeah.
And Cooper DeJean, by the way, is also a starting cornerback in the NFL. There've been two white starting cornerbacks in the NFL in the last 22 years, and
From both Iowa natives.
yeah, exactly, both from the state of Iowa. Both were overlooked too in the recruiting process. And
Don't you think don't you think Iowa's pursuit of Sasha Garcia and other cornerbacks in the transfer portal kind of give us an indication of where Phil's mind is right now? I think he feels like he needs another guy.
you're exactly right. And he does, and he should. That group underperformed.
Yeah.
Jamari played really well. Jamari was legit. The opposite side was you go in there. No, you go in there. No, you go in there. I mean, it was like when Anthony Mahogany just destroyed them in 2017 at Kinnick, and it's like they went from Manny Rugamba to Michael Ojemudia to Matt Hankins,
Hankins, yeah.
and then they decided, you know what, we're going to flip Josh Jackson to the other side. We just can't have this because they were just like, and that was the beauty of Jeff Brom and his style was, some coaches, most offensive coordinators, like, oh, that worked. We'll write that down and then we'll come back to it. He's like, now do it again, kind of like Kurt Russell in Miracle, again.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think so. I mean, if he feels like he needs to go out and get another cornerback that's a starting caliber cornerback and then let everybody else compete behind him, then do it. And again, business, they're making money now. It's not, hurting feelings time. And if you're one of those three or four other players, then it's your chance to go, all right, I either got to get a lot better this spring and during the winter conditioning period, or maybe it's not my place to be. And you know what? There's not a bad decision, because if you don't think it's the place for you, then you shouldn't be here.
Yes. And these decisions aren't exact. You're taking, but at least if you're an Iowa fan, you have guys evaluating that have, whether it's Seth Wallace with linebacker or Phil Parker at defensive back, a history of identification and development. So you trust them, but that doesn't mean they're going to be right. It doesn't mean if they bring in a cornerback that Deshaun Lee or John Nestor or TJ Hall, one or two or three of those guys don't develop by the season into guys you're like, all right, I feel really good. And then you're even better off because you've got more depth there. So it's inexact science. You try to build the roster the best you can. And we're going to continue to talk about this because they're going to continue to work on this before the season starts, because there's another transfer portal. Well, this one's not over yet, but then there's another one. So, and then they got to go through spring football. Do guys leave? Guys get hurt? We're so far from the 2025 season that we'll have plenty to talk about there. Probably good time to take a break. We've been going at this for a little bit, and we'll come back and talk some hoops. After this break. I need to find my ads, Scott. There they are. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now. Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk some more Hawks. Hang tight. We're back on the hotspot to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give them a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Hardcore Hawk fans got to have a Kinnick Scoreboard Entertainment Center. Contact Fanatics Furniture at 319-750-0005 or KNICK3615 at gmail.com. Scoreboard Entertainment Centers. Be hardcore. 319-750-0005 or KNICK3615 at gmail.com. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Check them out. Perez Brothers owned and operated. You'll remember them from El Banditos, Perez Tacos. Excellent food. Check them out. Black Angel Restaurant. Scott, I wanted to get into a little bit about the NIL and some discontent with fans, but I think it's a pretty deep discussion, and we still got hoops to talk about. So we're going to have plenty of time to talk about house settlement, kind of the structure of this. But just quickly, we've mentioned this before, and I don't think um, it always gets through, and it's just because there's so many unknowns and misconceptions and um, inaccurate information as it pertains to NIL and where the money comes from and who's in charge and all of those things. But, and I get it because we saw on Monday Brad Heinrichs from the Swarm, the CEO of the Swarm, solicited, a tweet soliciting money for Mark Gronowski. He didn't say that, but that was where the money was going. Or just for the NIL, other guys, Sam Phillips, the guys they're getting out of the portal. And then a few days later, our fans learned that the ticket prices are going up, not a ton, but they're still going to have to pay more money. So the fans are paying more money again. So I get the frustration. The fans are being asked to foot more of the bill now than the universities. That's not Brad Heinrich's fault. So stop attacking him on social media and elsewhere. He's doing what he can to try to make your team the best it can be, the team that he cheers for. You're attacking the wrong guy there. Now, you can look at the university and say, why isn't the university doing more to steer donations to the Swarm? That is where I think there is a potential issue that, because we've talked about this before, the pie, you're breaking up the financial pie. Where does the money go? Does it go to operations and the athletic department and salaries and things like that? But then some of the money now has to go to pay the players, and you guys are having to pay more for that. And I get it, and it sucks. And we're hoping that that changes with the House settlement, which we'll talk more about down the road, Scott. But the point of this rant is to get people of Brett Heinrichs back, because I get that people are pissed. They're having to pay more money for players and making their team better, but it's not his fault. It's the system right now.
It's the system, and the system was broken 10 years ago, and this is a byproduct of not solving any of those problems in the past, that not seeing this is the path you're going down, and this is there. By the way, there's a waterfall, and you're going to fall and fall and fall and fall, and now you're complaining because the water's cold at the bottom of it. I mean, this is just what happens. So with Shabazz Napier complaining about being hungry, and all that kind of stuff. So I get it. There is fan fatigue, and it's not just Iowa. It is everywhere. Our Georgia writer wrote about it. And, there's more money at Georgia than there is in Iowa, but the fans feel the same way. And you think about the last 5 years since the Supreme Court's 9-0 decision, when it comes to the allowance of universities to provide more academic financial benefits, but then also NIL being allowed. Who has to fit it all? Well, it's got to come from outside the school environment until the House settlement comes. So fans, well, we've extended the playoff, which has been great. It's been so much fun to watch it, and it's been much more entertaining. But if you want to attend those games, it costs you a lot more money. And you're talking about going to bowl destinations. You're not even campus environments are one thing, but when you're talking about flying to like look at Ohio State, you play at home.
That ain't a cheap trip to the Rose Bowl.
I know it isn't. There. And then going to the Cotton Bowl. And then if you win, you're going to Atlanta.
I know.
Or in Penn State's case, going to the Fiesta Bowl and now the Orange Bowl. And if you win, you're going to Atlanta. By the way, Penn State had to go to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship. So you try to support your team. In the past, it might have been the bowl game,
right.
Maybe, and then the playoff era 2. Now you're talking about 3 to 4 extra rounds. I mean, that's a lot, man. And so the fans, and this isn't exactly like a great economy for some people. Some people it's great, but other people it isn't. 90% of the people it isn't. And so when you look at all of those situations, you're looking at more money, and people are frustrated because it's like, why should I have to do this? And I think you're right on that. Iowa can't officially do anything about it now. Now, July 1st, it appears that will be the case and things will change significantly. But until then, you look at, Iowa, can they steer their contributions in that direction? And they've been lukewarm. They've been better with Beth. Gary was an absolute, like, treated him like a pariah. He wouldn't even talk, have a conversation with Brad Heinrichs, and with Beth, she understands it and she's trying to work, but it's kind of a tough uphill climb. And I guess, you've got 6 more months to deal with the system as it exists currently. Things are going to change. Now, how much do they change? Independent state by state, whatever, that remains to be seen. But if the settlement goes through, it's $20.5 million that you could pay. Iowa's going to pay it all. Most schools in the Big Ten will also pay it all. Some schools in the Big 12 won't. They just don't have the money for it.
Yeah.
And once it goes internal, then it's going to be so much better because then the Iowa engine can control this. Like Tennessee added like a 10% surcharge to tickets.
I always talked about that.
Yeah. And to me, that would almost be a smart move. This goes to the players and, replenishes our areas. But there's going to also have to come some cuts. And I assume that some schools are going to cut sports. They're just going to have to. And then out of the allocation pool, how much of it goes to football? I mean, if you want to be a winning football program, you're got to look at it 70 to 75%. It has to go to football. And if you're not good in football, you suck as an athletic department. So the rest of it will be really interesting to see how it gets divided at Iowa and other schools. I mean, how much of it goes to women's basketball, men's basketball, wrestling at Iowa, baseball, and track and some of the other sports. And then you look at Minnesota will be ice hockey will be really important, and women's volleyball at maybe Wisconsin and Penn State and Nebraska. Yeah.
Don't forget Nebraska.
Yeah. And Penn State, of course.
Yes.
But that to me, when it's under, and fans can just donate and then the university kind of takes your money, then it's going to be easy that way. And then, and finally, regarding Brad, I don't know what people are thinking going after him. He's a volunteer that's done this, that's donated millions of dollars to this enterprise. It's trying to help out in the best way possible. He's been covering losses for their promises out of his own pocket, and yet people are going after him like he's the one making the decisions on Cade McNamara. Go after Kirk. Go after Bryant. Don't go after Brad. I mean, what's Brad supposed to do? Say, I don't want to pay, or I don't want. Come on.
We're lucky to have him.
Absolutely. I mean, they should build him a statue or something over at, Harvard or
something's got to give, though, because if you look at it, and I know it's not an apples to orange comparison, but could you imagine like the Chiefs going to the fans and saying, "Hey, man, we got to keep Patrick Mahomes. We need some more money. Can you guys pass around the hat in Arrowhead, and we're going to raise money?" And it's not apples to oranges, but that's kind of what you're asking fans to do here. You're asking fans to pay for Mark Gronowski.
Yeah.
Like it's asking Chiefs fans to pay for Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, again, a lot different proportionally, but that's got to change. It has to change. And like Scott said, hopefully the House settlement goes off without a hitch. Have my doubts. I have with when you have politics and legal people involved and states involved with federal, I worry, but I'm hoping for the best again. Kind of like Iowa's offense with Mark Gronowski. I'm hoping for the best, but I'm also apprehensive because of the past. So there we go. I don't trust the NCAA, but if you're going to be angry about the current NIL situation, it's not Brad Heinrichs. Be mad at the football people making decisions, be mad at the athletic department and the universities that make up the NCAA, because they F this whole thing up, and that's why we are where we are. So let's move to basketball. Again, another situation where, money, the future, all of those things are on the table here, but um, I think it's like the haters are quiet until it's time to hate. And on Tuesday night, when Nebraska had a 15-point lead against the Iowa men in the second half with about 15 minutes to go, the fire Fran and we need change and all that stuff was firing up. And then lo and behold, Iowa comes back, but it doesn't squelch the conversation. We know it's there. It's simmering when they win and it bursts into flames when they lose, but it's there. And we've talked ad nauseum on this podcast about what needs to change. I retweeted a column that I wrote at the end of last basketball season. Nothing much has changed since then in terms of there's no atmosphere, there's no charm with Carver Hawkeye Arena. The bathroom situation sucks. The parking situation sucks. They don't hire people to direct traffic, the traffic flow. I mean, there's so much that needs to happen here. And again, I'll go back to before. I'm not saying a change at coach wouldn't help, but who are you going to attract with the current situation in Iowa and the resources without changing other things as you were when Licklider was hired and Fran were hired? People were not knocking at the door. I don't understand why people think people will be knocking. Good coaches you would pursue would be knocking down the door now. The coaching fraternity in basketball is closer to me there's more animosity, I think, in football between coaches. They get into each other and more pissy. There's more of a fraternity with basketball. They know what the Iowa situation is. They know what the NIL is. They know what the fan base and what's happened in the history. So it's not as easy as just firing Fran and fixing this situation, Scott. We've said it a time and time again. It's deeper than that.
Yeah, this is a really complicated issue. It's not, there are so many different angles, and you could have a legitimate hour-long debate on a stage and point by point, both way, and end up with a draw. I mean, and I could talk out of both sides of my mouth and be passionate, bashing at both sides.
I think we would all agree that something needs to be done.
Yeah.
It's in a bad spot. Were you there Tuesday?
I did not go. I was under the weather.
It was not good.
Yeah.
7:00 Tuesday night for a Big Ten game against a team that's coming off a win against UCLA at home, and it's Nebraska, and it was bad. It was the games you've been to previously this year, same.
It was listed attendance at 7,800. That's listed, and watching it on TV, and when Peacock did a nice job of concealing some of the stands, but it was bad. I mean, you could tell there was probably a third filled, maybe, and that's beneath what needs to happen, especially for a team that's not bad. This isn't Licklider era bad.
Look at their 4 losses, Scott. 3 of them are to ranked teams, and the other ones was at Wisconsin.
I think what you have is, I won't say it's a perfect storm, but it's a perfect shit storm of a lot of different things that they're on the floor. Talented team, consistency in being good in certain areas and terrible in other areas. It's consistently bad as a defense. It's consistently.
We talked about this the opposite way early in the podcast about the football program, right?
Yeah, right.
The thing that gets under people's skin, and it's defense for basketball, and legitimately so.
When you're, and I haven't replaced these numbers since the Nebraska game, but again, Iowa first in scoring in the Big Ten, last in scoring defense. Iowa, out of the last 8 years, Iowa has been first or second in scoring 6 times. The last 8 years, they've been last or second to last in scoring 7 times. Those numbers just, that people see that, and you know what you're going to get. This year,
you can't reach your ceiling as a basketball program not playing defense. You cannot reach your ceiling as a football program not having an offense.
Exactly. It's like the unevenness, and you've got to thread the needle. But but you can get bumped at any point.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple other areas that going into the Tuesday game, they were last by far in the Big Ten in field goal defense. So sometimes you could say, well, the scoring numbers is you have a lot of possessions, you score a lot of points, therefore you're going to give up some points. That's a fair art, okay, I understand. But when you start to talk about defense and you're 18th among 18 teams, and you give up 46.4%, which I know is down probably a little bit, but the second worst team is at 43-7, you've got a major problem.
Mm-hmm.
That is a significant difference. And your rebounding margin last in the Big Ten at -5. So if you can't rebound and you can't defend, and all you got is, I mean, you're a glass jaw puncher. You're going to get knocked out, which is what happened against Wisconsin. And since 2018, they've allowed 5 different Big Ten teams to hit 19 3-pointers in a game, 4 of which set school records. Wisconsin happened to set the Big Ten record, 21 to 31. I mean, I can't do that on a video game, so, and then 116 points, the most they ever scored in a Big Ten game, the most that's been scored in a Big Ten game since 1995. I mean,
we see the extremes, don't we, Scott?
Yeah.
Like, you think about that game in Wisconsin, it was just so extreme. It was so just disheartening if you're an Iowa fan, like how the football team played in the Big Ten championship games, right? You look at it and you're like, God, that's just such a dreadful performance. It's just hard to pull yourself out of that as a fan.
Exactly. It's like the 2023 team offensively had the worst numbers since 1984 as an offense in the Big Ten. I mean, the worst by a Power 5 program in 10 years. When you have those extremes, it's really hard. Now you go, okay, you've posted those horrific numbers, and they've been generational. That's not just a one-year blip. It's generational to an extent. What do you do about it? Well, Kirk wasn't going to do anything until Beth Getz did something, and President what's her face? I was going to say, Barbara Wilson.
President Babs.
Yeah, Babs. She's our Babs Streisand. But until they pushed out Brian, he wasn't going to do anything, not unless Brian got another gig somewhere else. But now that since he was forced to, they got a pretty good offensive coordinator who's changed the system, who's gotten now a pretty good quarterback and altered the running game, which was supposed to be their forte, and made it sing. So it looks like, and it appears that the offense is changed for Iowa football. They're moving in the right direction. What are they doing differently on Iowa basketball? Nothing. They've not changed one thing at all.
So do you have him hire a defensive specialist?
The problem is football sells out every game.
Yeah.
They still win decent games, big games. The basketball program wins a lot of regular season games. It has won the Big Ten tournament. What does he have to rest? What kind of, equity does he have in the bank? Okay, he's the winningest coach in Iowa men's basketball history. That's fine. But 97 teams have gone to the Sweet 16 since Iowa last win. This system has not paid off, and it's like with football too. If you don't have a defense at football, you're not going to win a championship either. In fact, all out of the 4 final teams in the Final Four, this is their rank in scoring defense: 1, 2, 4, and 7. So basketball is the same way. You don't have to be Wisconsin with Frank Kaminsky and all them to be a great team, but you've got to play you got to be 9th in the Big Ten in defense to have a good team that's capable of going on. And when you compound that with the apathy that is so obvious, and you combine it with 7,800 people going to a 7:00 tip-off in the middle of the week without bad weather. It's one thing if there's a snowstorm out there, but it's another thing when there's nobody. Well, the students were there. Okay, but that doesn't matter because 6:00 is too early for people to get off work, right? We hear that all the time. 8:00.
There's always excuses.
7:00, you thread the needle. I just don't know how you can continue this. I don't think you can with the staff, and it may not be Fran's fault, But the problem is Kirk, obviously the women's coaches, brands, they have built up a lot of equity, good equity among fans, the right donors, and they can withstand any kind of issues. Franz doesn't have much equity. He has it with a select few people, but the fans aren't among them. You don't see him out there glad handing people, shaking hands. Some if a gesture like after a game, if he would go up in the stands and start shaking hands or something like that, or that would go a long way. It's not his personality. That's not what he's done. And when you see this trajectory of apathy, it leads you to say they need to do something different. And I know what you mean. I covered both of the last two, changes, coaching changes. There was a lot more interest after Alford left than there was with Licklider, but that was also 15 years ago. And if you're paying a lot of money, people will listen. But how do you get them energized? I think this fan base, it's going to take a lot to get it out of the apathy. Even it doesn't matter who the coach is, doesn't matter who the players are. It's going to take some time.
And I think you just need to invest more in the program, whether it's with Fran or without Fran. We've talked all the way back to Good Call. We talked 20 years ago. We were talking about needing more bathrooms and vendors in the stands and things, making the experience better for people there. Because if you look at it from a historical standpoint, Fran is won in relation to what the program's success has been throughout most of its history. He's right there. He's the winningest coach. I know that, but it's the Sweet 16. That's the one that people need. People are not. That's kind of the main gripe right now is why can't we win in March? So that's an issue. And then the likability of the coach, and I hear people say, well, the women's basketball is Caitlin Clark is that changed everything. And the women's basketball program does do more in terms of engaging fans. So that's a positive for them. I'm not sure the engagement would do what Caitlin Clark did. In fact, I know it wouldn't for men's basketball. But if you think Fran is your guy, you need to sit with him and say, what do we need to do here? And then also say, this is what we think you need to do here to fix this. If he's not the guy to do that, then make a change because this can't work, right? You talked about the expansion of the Big Ten in terms as it relates to football. Well, it's the same in basketball. UCLA, Oregon, USC, and Washington are down a little bit now, but historically pretty good basketball programs. So where do you fit in that? And I'm not sure Iowa's in a good spot when it comes to men's basketball right now in relation to its resources compared to the competition.
The saddest number I've seen that I've tracked over the years when it comes to Iowa men's basketball is the last time Iowa sold $4 million worth of season tickets was 2005. I mean, we're talking.
That's the Bruner Horner.
Well, Alaska. Yeah. Well, that was before the big year.
The big year, but it was still when they were here.
Right. This tracks
20 years ago.
20 years ago. This tracks before the second Pierce situation.
Yeah.
And so what it does is the apathy is stagnant to decreasing over a 2-decade era. That's something you just can't wipe out in one day. You've got to reinvigorate the fan base, and you got to do it at a grassroots level. It just can't be, hey, we got a new coach. Here's the sign game today. Come support your Hawks. We know you love your Hawks, and you better love your Hawks. It's nothing like that. You've got to make sure, and this is where, as Fran, he's given a probably too much credit for turning it around after Licklider. That I think a lot of coaches could have done something similar to that. And he's deserved some praise for how he's been able to maintain it, because since 2012, only one other Big Ten team, Michigan State and Iowa, they're the only two that have had one or less losing seasons in the Big Ten. That's an impressive statistic, and you got to give him his respect for that and the amount of players they've had. but can you go the next level? Can you take the next step? And Iowa can't do that. And part of that is style of play. But then you look at the fan engagement. It is really important in Iowa. It's
Mhm.
different than it is in Philadelphia or in other parts of the country where you don't need to do that. You do in the Midwest. It's the way people relate to you, the way they buy in. And it's not just standing up and giving a 10-minute speech at a nightclub banquet, shaking a couple of hands and heading out, to your car. It's being able to, the things that we've seen them lose over the years, the ability to connect to fans, the PTL. When you play for that month and a half in the summer, um, it allows a couple hundred to 400 or 500 fans per session to go out and watch your teams play, maybe shake a hand, maybe get an autograph. That was that really it allowed us to write, to shoot video of it, to talk about basketball in the summer, to have some relationship with your players so we can write about it more in the off season. I mean, that is fans start to listen, they start to care, they start to pay attention. It's like, wow, did you see that dunk that Tyler Cook had at the PTL? That's all gone.
Shirts and skins
Yeah.
is gone. Playing Drake and You and I is gone. A lot
Right.
of the things that people liked.
Yeah. And what do you replace it with? If you're, and for a few years there, they had like a Midnight Madness type of thing,
Yeah.
and that's gone. They should have done something like that. Now they kind of do it downtown, during homecoming week or whatever. But you got to figure out a way to get the fans energized to care. Now it's about caring, not just extending it. And I would argue during the summer where they're all on campus, why aren't you doing more barnstorming events? You can make it an
Yeah.
NIL event. Why don't, hey, on this Tuesday night, we're going to run up to Cedar Rapids, or we're going to go to Des Moines, or we're going to go to Mason City, and we're going to have a workout. We're going to have a rally, donation, $5 to get in. This all goes to the Swarm, just hey, Iowa fans, check us out, blah, blah, blah.
Autographs.
Autographs, interviews, stories.
Yep.
Those things matter in this world. And Iowa just does not wanted to do it. It's all been all about let's just coach the team. Well, and then there's events like Coaches versus Cancer and stuff, but that's a little bit different. That's for donors. You want to engage the fans. That's who come there. And there's a reason why the NIT crowds have always been better than the regular season crowds.
And
So
they draw people. I mean, they filled they drew well in Moline and Sioux Falls.
right.
People came out there.
Mm-hmm. And you can have all kinds of different things. And you don't have to do an NI, you don't have to do the PTL, but you got to do something different. You got to do something to keep and maintain that. And God bless them, but there's also some blame to go around for internally the promotional wings, having players at a podium for every news conference instead of talking to people on the side is not a way to get more stories out there. It's not a way to get more fun stories, certainly not. So they've done themselves a disservice at every single turn. And then you kind of wonder why. Well, why isn't this working? Well, out of sight, out of mind. I don't have a connection with this team. It doesn't go deep in the tournament. Whereas and I live in Des Moines, and Iowa State, though, 2 out of the last 3 years have gone to the Sweet 16, and this is coming after an 0-18 season. That's worse than what Licklider ever did. And yet they brought in a guy who fixed it immediately in a transfer portal era, goes to 2 Sweet 16s in a 3-year period, and now they're ranked third, or I think third in the country. And that's what people see, or hey, look at Wisconsin. When Tom Davis was fired, the differences between those two programs couldn't have been more stark. It was like Iowa and Northwestern football in the early 90s. And instead, Wisconsin now is clearly the better program, has been to the Final Four, been to the championship game, won Big Ten championships, and Iowa has just flatlined. And so, changing the coach, you got to change the culture. And the culture starts with the coach, and then it extends to administration. Now, I know Beth wants to change the arena. She wants to bring the students closer to the floor. That is something that she stated. But you gotta raise some money for that. And women's basketball is riding high, but it's not a cash cow. It's just not. They don't make enough money to do that, and certainly not in TV. And
And
wrestling
I
is an
and I think if you upgrade Carver, it helps you to sustain what you've got with women's basketball, and you don't lose people.
right,
You
exactly.
keep them.
Hmm. And then wrestling is always sold out.
Yeah.
It's a niche audience.
Yep.
It's an audience that the people who care so passionately for, and they're obsessive with it, and that's great. But it's still a smaller audience than the others. So I don't know. I've gone on a long rant, Rob, about
No,
this.
I mean we'll have plenty more time to talk about this because it's not a situation that's going to fix itself, and it's going to need to be addressed at some point.
Mhm.
And we'll see how this goes as the season goes on. Huge game on Saturday night against Indiana. Get a win there, then you start to build some momentum maybe because you got the West Coast trip coming up to LA. So, um, yeah. But I think this team has done talking from a basketball standpoint, this team has been pretty entertaining. And, the other night without Drew Thelwell, who was arguably their best player at Wisconsin, they fought. Man, just get Josh Dix the ball more. And he needs to be more aggressive. Sometimes he disappears or defers, I should say, to other people. He needs to do what he did the other night. And I don't know what got into Peyton Sanford. It was like, screaming out the window, "We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore." And he just stopped. It was like he went from missing that 2 foot layup under the basket
Yeah.
where he airballed the layup to just taking over the game. And Iowa needs that. If Iowa has Josh Dix, Owen Freeman, and Peyton Sanford playing to their level, that they can play to with Thelwell and some of the other pieces, it's an NCAA tournament team in my mind. The problem is getting those guys to do that consistently together. There's a chance with this team, but the time is now, Scott. There's no more, it's got time to develop. It's got time to get there. It's got to get there now.
Yeah, playtime's over when it
Yeah.
comes to that. And what you got to do is you got to take care of the teams in your neighborhood because you're gonna lose on the road. It's too tough of a league, as you said, and it was that way even before you had UCLA join and the other teams join. I mean, it's just Indiana at home. You cannot just say, oh, well, we beat Indiana. Indiana's in the same boat, and their fans are passionate about it. I mean, they care and it matters and stuff. So you've got to make sure that each and every step that you take care of the games you can take care of. You're gonna lose games. It's not the end of the world. The one thing is it's like had you lost 92-85 at Wisconsin, whatever. You lost on the road against a team that you don't beat on the road very often anyway, and they don't win your place very often anyway. So move on. But to just play like you don't have arms on defense, or legs for that matter too. It felt like you guys are giving up. You guys don't care, on defense, and that's something that they have to avoid. But if Dix, if Sanford, and then you throw in some of the other guys, Thelwell or Sayor or whatever, playing well, then I think you've got something there that this team, yeah, it can compete. It can win 10 or 11 games in the Big Ten. Maybe it's, bright side here is it beats Indiana at home on Fox. It looks good doing it. It's got an exciting offense. Split on the road. Maybe you win it at USC. Maybe you lose at UCLA. And then you play Minnesota and Penn State at home and you got a chance there. Then things start to build and you don't feel so bad. You go to Ohio State, maybe it's a 50-50 game. You play Purdue and Wisconsin at home. There's an opportunity there. But if you don't play well defensively this week, you lose a close game to Indiana, the fans get more upset. Then you go out and you lay an egg on the West Coast. It could spill the other way, and you don't have anybody really backing you up home. So, But the one thing that I will say that's this has always been an exciting team. There, it would be so much worse if they had the record that it has, if they were winning games 64 to 59. I mean, if you're going to be mediocre, if you're going to be mid-level, thank God you're scoring 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and I think it bottomed out when they were down with the Nebraska by 15 the other
Yeah.
night. But give the team, give Fran, give everybody there credit because you're coming off getting your ass handed to you at Wisconsin. Now you're down to another rival at home by 15. They found a way, and hopefully you can build on that. Or is it going to be up and down, up and down? We'll see how it goes. The women, Iowa women, 23rd
Yeah.
ranked 24th somewhere now. At Illinois tonight, a pretty good Illinois team. Iowa lost to Illinois last time there, and that was with Caitlin Clark. So
Yeah.
this is a very interesting game. And Iowa women at 2-2. They lost their second game last year, Scott, on February 11th at Nebraska, their second Big Ten loss.
Mhm.
This year it came Sunday against Maryland, and that was a game where I think some of Iowa's deficiencies were magnified against one of the country's better teams.
Yeah.
That team almost beat USC last night. That was a really
Right.
good game. Did you
Yeah.
catch any of that last night?
I
USC?
watched a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, good game. Really good basketball. Really good women's basketball in the Big Ten this year. I'd encourage people to expand their horizons beyond Iowa because there's some really good games. But the turnovers, Scott, that has been the issue when Iowa hasn't played well. In the three losses, they're averaging over 24 turnovers a game. It's not a mystery. You got to take care of the basketball. When you think about it, think about how much Caitlin, Kate Martin, Molly Davis, and even Gabby Marshall to a degree had the ball in their hands last year. You get it. But again, like the men's team, you got to figure it out. We're done. We're in the Big Ten now. You got to figure out a way to fix it if you want to reach where you can reach.
You're 2 months into the season now. It's one thing when you talk about November's still filling things out. December, you're still kind of working through things. You see there's a pattern emerge. Now, those are reasons. This is about results. And there are two areas that they absolutely need to improve on. I think they're an NCAA tournament team, but in order to be kind of what I would say in the upper third of the Big Ten, which I think is because I think they're clearly not as good as the top four teams. USC, UCLA, Maryland, and Ohio State are clearly better than Iowa. No question in my mind. The next tier, though, which is Michigan State, who they lost to, which is Illinois, although they have two significant injuries that it's going to be really hard for them to come back from. Indiana, Nebraska,
Minnesota's better this year.
Minnesota's really good. Some of those teams, in order to compete to be in the top six, which I think would get you still maybe 2 first-round home games.
Yeah, that's the thing too. You have to remember with women's basketball, the higher seed you get, it's really important.
Yeah. To me, it's number one, you're right, turnovers. And what's the reason for that? Do they have a true point guard? Or is it they're kind of allowing Lucy to handle the ball the way Caitlin did, and she distributes fine. She's a great scorer. But does she set the offense? And I'm not so sure that that's quite there yet. I think Aaliyah Guyton needs more minutes. She's just been fantastic.
I'm with you. We're in lockstep on this one. She needs to have the point. She needs to have the ball at point guard, and let's see what she can do.
I would put her at 1, and I would put Lucy at 2, and I would get them in.
And then put Sid at. You can put Sid at 3.
You can put Sid anywhere.
Yeah,
you can put her at 5 if you want to. But
and I think Kylie might be better coming off the bench.
Yeah, and she's been good doing that.
Yep.
And if Taylor McCabe can do it, so can she. And
yep.
That's fine. And if you want to vary it by matchup, and if on senior day you want to put her in the starting lineup, fine, do all that. But I think right now what Aaliyah brings is
we might see that tonight too.
Yeah.
Jan hinted yesterday at potentially a lineup change. So
yeah, and some of the turnovers are caused by both inexperience and also lack of chemistry. But that excuse is kind of fizzling now because it's 2 months in. It was a reason. Now it becomes an excuse. And that's when, like Taylor Stremlo is, I think, a terrific young player. It was their worst game the other day. It was kind of like, okay, now you're in the big leagues. You're playing Maryland. And this is what happens. Okay, you got to learn how to value the basketball a little bit better. I think like Ava Hayden and Tegan Malini are both really good players too. I wonder with Tegan how much, she reaching kind of a ceiling, if you will, as a freshman. I think as Sid continues to play alongside Hannah and Lucy, that chemistry will grow. The other thing, and this is something that is kind of inexcusable, is their last in 3-point defense in the Big Ten. They need to be better there. You just need to be better. Turnovers are something you can work through. You're aggressive. They happen.
Hey, stop throwing the entry pass when she's being fronted and getting it stolen because you're not throwing it correctly because there's a double coming from the backside.
Yeah.
I mean, and that sometimes with, when you lose arguably the greatest women's basketball player that was handling the ball all the time, there's an adjustment period. But again, it's time to do it.
2 months in,
Yep.
Halfway through the season, time to those reasons are excuses from this day forward. So, I still think this is a very good team, and I think that they will have a lot of really good wins, and I think Illinois tonight, I think they win. Not having Makira Cook is going to be a killer for Illinois. I really feel bad. 1,700 points in her career. She's a great player. Really sad. I feel that way for her. And then Indiana on Sunday, that is a big game because that determines your positioning in the Big Ten. And it's been a good rivalry. It always has. The hell of the schools entered the Big Ten together the same day in 1899. But
no, really, we weren't there to cover that.
I was covering that expansion, and me and Jim Delaney was still the commissioner in 1899. But no, but
you think about it, Scott. Neither the men or the women really have a bad loss. It's just a matter, can they continue that, and can they stack some good wins? That's really from this point forward what we need to see with both of the teams.
Yeah, and they're in a tough league. This is unforgiving. People don't feel sorry for you. They're not going to go over to Illinois tonight and say, yeah, I know you lost 2 of your starters who are really important, so we're going to take it easy on you. And if you win, we'll feel happy. they're going to try to win by 20. And then Sunday, with Indiana, it's like, yeah, I know we lost Caitlin Clark and you lost Mackenzie Combs, but let's just be nice, okay? Terry Moran and Jan Jensen will give each other hugs at halftime.
Yeah.
So.
That's I think we've run this thing quite a ways. We still have to do our picks though, so let's get those in here. But men are winning tonight, 6:00. That is a Big Ten, big BTM plus, folks. So if you're listening to this before the game, you're going to need to subscribe to that if you don't have a subscription. And then, as Scott said, the men on Saturday night that's a Fox game against Indiana at Carver. So 2 upcoming games there.
Yeah.
And we got Big Ten teams still playing in the college football playoffs, so we get to still make some picks.
Yeah, we sure do here. And that's Penn State tonight playing against Notre Dame. And I haven't looked up the specific lines. I saw what it was yesterday, but I'll just add that here. Penn State and Notre Dame. The consensus is Notre Dame -1.5 in the Orange Bowl. And by the way, I'll add this, that through the bowl season, the last phase of the bowls, I was 6-6-1. You were 5-7-1. We lost.
Bowls are tough.
Yeah, they are. We pushed on Iowa in the Iowa, Missouri. It was a 3-point loss. So that was kind of funny. But like I lost Boise State. Even though I thought Penn State would win, it was -11. I thought that was a little high. So, but I went that route, and then anyway. So Penn State and Notre Dame, minus 1.5 for the Irish. I'm going to take the Irish. Um, I think it's gonna. I actually picked this game to go in overtime on our site. So, and I think they win by 3 points, even though it won't be by a field goal. It'll be that they have the ball last and they score a touchdown, and Penn State kicks a field goal.
These games are so hard to pick. This one especially.
Yeah,
I'm going to go with you. I think Notre Dame has the most consistent defense of the two, and I think that's the biggest difference here. Um, and I think Riley Leonard's ability to run. There's just it's slight though. This one could go either way. Before we go to the second game, I wanted to hit you with this. Bet Rivers has, if it were to be Ohio State and Penn State, what do you think? They have a line on this already. What do you think it would be?
6.
9.5 for
Nine and a
Ohio
half?
State. If it were Ohio State and Notre Dame, what do you think?
10.5.
7.5.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If it were Penn State and Texas,
Oh, that's a good one. I would say Texas 3.5.
got it. Bingo. Stuck the
Hey.
landing on that one. Notre Dame and Texas.
Notre Dame 4.5.
1.5
One
for
and a half.
Texas being favored.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah, styles make fights.
yep. Interesting though. I found those interesting.
Yeah, very much so. And so the last or the other one in the Cotton Bowl.
We'll get to
Which-
pick the national championship too, no matter what.
Yeah, exactly.
No, not necessarily. I guess if Notre Dame and Texas win, we won't.
Yeah,
We could pick it anyway, though.
yeah, we could, might as well. Go SEC, go independent. Ohio State -6 is the line now. It's dropped from 6.5 at the open to 6. I'm taking the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I'm on the Buckeye train right now. They look the most impressive. I don't know if it's going to win, but yeah, the Bucks. If you look at the performances so far in the college football playoffs, they've been most impressive.
Yeah, for sure. They've been. I mean, I was there last week, and it was real and it was spectacular. Let's put it that way. I mean, so yeah, I was very impressed with Ohio State, and if they play, and really, here's I went through like a 30 statistical analysis of all the teams and how I felt like they can measure up, and this goes beyond the eye test, which Ohio State wins that going away for me, but the number that stands out the most in Texas versus Ohio State in what could be a major detriment for the Longhorns is Ohio State's third in the country with 47 sacks. The Longhorns have given up 33, which ranks 104th.
Yeah.
And Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback, very accurate, does a lot of great things. But if he's on his back or if he's getting rushed, that changes things. Now, they are the most explosive team in the country. Texas is. People don't see that as much as they do Ohio State. I mean, what's funny is when you talk about plays of 20 plus yards, Texas has 102. Ohio State only has 69. But
Yeah.
still. Now, when you look at Notre Dame, Penn State, the numbers are very similar in just about every area. The ones that stand out and differently are Penn State is by far number one in the country in turnovers forced. I mean, they're like Iowa 3 years ago with a quarterback who can move. They're plus 18. They've scored more than 100 extra points on teams over because of turnovers. So that's just pretty remarkable. But they also have the worst field goal kicker in the NCAA. They're 134th kicking field goals. So that could cost them. Now, they've been good in the playoffs, so who knows? But
they need Abdul Carter.
Yeah, and Penn State needs Abdul Carter, to get out.
Franklin said yesterday, they keep saying, Tom Allen said earlier in the week, he's doing everything he can to play. Yeah, why wouldn't he be?
You're right. I mean, it's like, he decided just to lay around and channel surf on and sit on his phone and while everybody else went to practice, so
he could be a Bear or a Jet next year, Abdul Carter.
Yeah. I wouldn't wish him that. Just like I wouldn't wish Matt Campbell that, but
all right. It's 11 o'clock. We should probably get out of here and let you guys get on with your day so we can get on with ours. Thanks so much for listening. We'll have plenty to talk about again next week on the Hotspot podcast. So join us, won't you? Until then, be well, and we will talk to you soon. Peace. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.